So hi everyone, welcome to week 3. Apologies for not being as on top of. I realized late yesterday that taxes were due, so I would have had a slightly more robust set of so the resources and things on the week 3 page will be continuing to be updated. I didn't get all of the links and everything in there, but I did get taxes in at the appropriate time, so I feel like that was at least a win of sorts. So let's share screen. And okay, week 3. So this is our equity and accessibility and whatnots. So transcript should be up if there's stuff you want to share. I included, Stephanie had a language assessing and doing language stuff on Canvas thing that I sent out to everyone in the wee hours of the night/morning last night. Set up Flipgrid in part because, so these are a lot of, if there are people who would like to play around with other platforms, but these are, Discord, Flipgrid, a lot of these are things that people have used with success in their own teaching in their own classrooms. And I want to give people really a sandbox to play around with things and screw up and make all of those mistakes, rather than the first time I tried to use Hypothesis for a class assignment, it was sort of an unmitigated disaster. The instructions that I gave the students weren't very good. They were very confused about how to use stuff. They just, not having really tried it on my own, caused a lot of problems. And so I am a huge advocate for, as we're sharing different technologies, and especially this week, there's going to be a lot of things that we can think about, strengths and weaknesses that technologies provide. And if there are things people want to play around with in a pretty safe place to screw up and embarrassingly accidentally share things you didn't mean to share and go, oh God, I will never do that again. That would be, I want to give people a place. So if there's any interest in any platforms that you have not used before, but you would like to try, let me know. I will set one up, and anyone who wants to get in there and play around, I appreciate people getting in and playing around with Flipgrid a little bit. Responding to I set this up when we first went online. I set up a sample Flipgrid, and literally no one but Ellen had any interest in playing around with it. So it was nice to have some other people in there, and just thinking about ways that we can kind of supplement or try and replicate an in-person environment that we're not going to have to create community in our classes, especially for classes that involve either group assignments or discussion, where we need to have a sort of classroom environment that there's kind of trust and camaraderie there to have really kind of robust discussions. So I think that's it. I will continue. I have been compiling things in a Google Drive folder, and I haven't made them available yet, but if anyone has syllabi, other stuff, I will put that up this week. So I will let you all know when that's available. And then we talked a little bit, I saw somewhere on the internet, this revised Bloom's visualization. I think someone sent it to me. But just thinking about it in a different, instead of this kind of pyramid that we talked about the kind of hierarchical implications of that normally shaped pyramid. And so instead thinking of this as sort of a broadening funnel going upward, I think visually maybe gets at, it kind of reorients us away from some of the things that people had objections to, where we act like remembering is only for intro classes, and we sort of, there's this idea that there's necessarily a hierarchy, that remembering is bad and creating is good, which, they are things that all work together, and I think this visualizes it in a way that is nice. So just wanted to share that. And I believe, so goals and objectives, and Ellen, I'm gonna mostly turn it over to you now, since you're our first section here. Do you want to talk about goals and objectives, or do you want me to? We didn't talk about who was taking what. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess
we'll in the chat.
We are. We can be fairly cash here. Yeah, full disclosure. Amy and I are we're not being compensated for this in any way. So if this is slapdash, if it seems slapdash, it's because it is. Mostly we're here to raise questions and stuff. So goals and objectives for today. We're going to be able to, mostly like Amy said, we're going to be talking about equity, accessibility, inclusion, I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about those words and kind of what they mean. I'm not entirely sure that we'll be able to be actually able to articulate the difference between them, but we're going to attempt to try. I don't know. Main thing we're going to try to do today is identify barriers to accessibility in your classroom, and think about ways to solve that problem. And the main thing that Amy is going to introduce to kind of try to help us bridge that gap is thinking about universal design for learning. So we're going to define that. We're going to think about ways to apply its core principles to our classes. And we're going to provide some relevant resources for further learning about UDL. All right, Amy, next slide, please. Hooray. So the question, what is equity? So I want to bring up actually go back. For anybody who wants to try to come up with a definition, feel free to type into the chat. But there are kind of a lot of, and I think one of the things that if we did this, and I don't want to take up too much time doing it, but if we were able to like poll everybody and ask what their definition of equity is, we'd all come up with something really different, right? That we would want to say. So I want to bring up first that there are issues with terminology that referring to inclusivity and accessibility and equity are all kind of, those terms get really fuzzy. So I'm going to try to define them in the way that has made the most sense to me, but there is no, I don't think there's really universals here. The main thing that I want to bring up, so obviously we're not going to be able to cover all issues of equity in the next hour or hour and a half or even this week. I think the main thing here is that I want to kind of acknowledge that I think it's important to acknowledge, we are none of us kind of superhumans who can fix every problem, or foresee every issue that might come up in our classrooms. Instead, what's really important, right, is listening, trying to fix what we can, using whatever power we have in our classroom to try to make them as equitable as possible. Which is why one of the main things we want to do this week is put the question out to you guys, right? In terms of listening and crowdsourcing and trying to figure out what problems and what solutions we can think of, because that's the thing, is that we all are coming to our classroom with different experiences. I am a first generation college student, right? Nobody in my family went to college before me. And so I have, I definitely have had equity issues as a student, right? Where there were things that I just didn't get that my peers did, who had kind of more access to college experiences than I had. But there are plenty of issues that I skate right by, right? That I don't see a problem until somebody brings it up to me. So one of the things we want to do this week is using each other's resources and thoughts and experiences to bring up those kinds of questions, and seeing what solutions we can brainstorm for them. So listening and crowdsourcing is really important, as well as transparency, often with our with each other, but also with our students, and creating, developing those relationships with our students so that they feel comfortable if there's something that we haven't anticipated, right? Reaching out to us and letting us know that, they don't have access to whatever. If we use an online tool and it is not accessible in some way, having an environment when our students can tell us that, right, is important. Okay, I think that's all I wanted to say. Is there anything you wanted to add in there, Amy?
No, sorry, I screwed up the slides. I accidentally hit some weird buttons that I didn't. There was a period of chaos there. I accidentally switched into presenter mode, and I apologize for that. No, I think that all sounds great. You're crushing it.
Okay. Oh, well, excellent. So go ahead to the next one. So in order to try to define things, I think we've probably all seen some version of this image, which is supposed to represent a difference between equality and equity, right? Equality meaning giving everybody the same resources, irrespective of their actual needs, and equity actually trying to respond to individual needs to get everybody to the same outcome. So to build equity in our courses, right, this means we have to respond to individual student needs. We need to get to know our students and which means we have to get to know our students and their needs, which we can't always predict in advance, right? I don't know if I'm going to have a student with a hearing impairment or something like that before they come into my classroom, that I'm going to need to help them to help make everything accessible in that way, right? So there are some things that we can and kind of plan for in advance, and there are other things that we can't necessarily. That doesn't necessarily, the example of the hearing impairment is not necessarily something we can't plan for in advance, by the way. That's not where the example was meant to go. So my main advice here is going to be to work within our institutional resources with disability services, centers for teaching and learning, things like that, whatever you have access to, a counselor in K-12, like whatever it is that you have institutional access to. The problem with this is that well, there's a bunch of problems with this. One is that our students don't always tell us what their needs are, right? And our students don't always know what their own needs are, right? A lot of students are operating with undiagnosed learning disabilities or things like that, and therefore don't have the, and often don't have institutional support. And people who, obviously, and that falls along a spectrum of privilege as well, right? That our most privileged students are the ones who are most likely to get accommodations from official institutional resources like disability services. So that's something we have to keep in mind as well. So the way I kind of think about categorizing it is building equity in our course is really important. Responding to individual student needs is really important. And the failure to respond to individual student needs, right, is something that is something that we should avoid at all costs, right? On the other hand, I just tried to change the slide and forgot that I can't, Amy. But on the other hand, right, we can think about this as approaching equity, approaching inclusivity and accessibility from the other side, right? Building inclusivity and accessibility into our courses by trying to lower the barriers to learning for all students, right, regardless of their individual need. So the way I like to see this is if we're reflecting on this image, right, is not by trying to give everybody a boost up, but instead by trying to break down that fence, right? Because as we said, our students aren't always going to be able to tell us their individual needs. They may not be able to anticipate their own needs themselves, especially in as unanticipatable an experience as we're going to be going through this fall, right? Like we have not lived through this pandemic for very long yet. We're not going to be able to anticipate all the problems that students may encounter. And the students can't either, right? So the things that we need to think about are kind of structural, pedagogical, logistical, and any other sorts of barriers that might create an inequitable learning environment, and do our best to eliminate them or help students manage them in whatever way we can, right? We're not going to be able, as I said earlier, we can't eliminate every barrier, at least not on our own, but we can try. So I think then, unless there's anything you wanted to add, Amy, I think we can probably go into the first exercise.
Yeah, I just wanted to, there's some discussion going on in the chat that I wanted to just mention of kind of the idea of like, why is there a fence in the first place? And I think it's worth just kind of highlighting some of the things people are talking about in terms of, many of us are working at the classroom level, and there are changes we can do to make our classrooms, give people the appropriate boosts they need to see the game, to use this metaphor. Whereas there are, and I can go back here, right, the decision, things that will actually take the fence entirely down may not be in our control.
Yeah.
And so I think, thinking about what we can do at our classroom level, what we can do to advocate for things, we can advocate for things that will get that fence removed, but there are also a lot of things that we can't probably control in our individual classrooms or in our positions that we hold, but we can at least, we can do things that will attack this from the classroom level while also advocating for things that will remove the fence entirely.
Yeah.
So
I mean, yeah. I have previously advocated for Amy being the queen of all people.
One day.
And I have all confidence that if this were to happen, that she would erase all systemic issues. But it hasn't happened yet. I don't know why, Amy. Really, you should really be doing more stuff.
Agreed. But
yeah,
so I think,
yeah.
I mean, just to not that I don't love hearing how I should be queen of the world, but what we want to focus on here are a lot of tangible steps that we can accomplish in the short term. What can we do in the fall that will make life better for our students and for ourselves? As opposed to, we can certainly lobby our Congress people about we need funding to do, but there are things that aren't going to change quickly, and there are things that we can minimize harm and maximize learning in small settings as we can. So
yeah, exactly. So I think the main, I don't know. I mean, we can totally have a separate conversation too about bigger issues that we want to advocate for. I would be very into that. But I think maybe sticking to stuff we can actually achieve in our own classrooms is the way for us not to get too demoralized today, I think. So breakout groups is going to be our next thing. So as we did before, anybody who has attended previously will be familiar with this. Basically, we're going to break down into randomly divided breakout groups. If you have tech trouble, just come back to the main room. Don't forget to introduce yourselves to your group mates. You may or may not have met them before, but don't forget. And basically what we're asking you to do is look over and contribute to the shared doc that is linked here. Amy, if you could share it in the chat, that would also be helpful. Share the